Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Andrew Milani, and today we'll be discussing and previewing this upcoming NHL season. I'm just going to kind of go rapid fire. Not going to do too many predictions, just going to be more kind of general impressions of each team going division by division. So let's start right away. We'll get to the Boston Bruins. I think this is a solid team. That top line, those three guys, solid as ever. Losing David Krejci as a second-line center will hurt. I mean, they have Hall there, so that's going to kind of help out a little bit, I guess, with secondary scoring. But with Charlie Coyle there as second-line center, you can't really see that working too well. Hall is a bit of an insurance policy, so they can kind of turn to that if that's not going to work. Defense, still as solid as ever. You know, McAvoy, Carlo, they got the big boys back there. Goaltending is probably the most interesting element of this team. Tuukka Rask probably won't be back until around the new year, so Linus Ullmark is going to be holding down the fort in the meantime. They gave him a lot of money. I think he's going to be okay considering that he's going to be insulated behind that Boston defense. And by the time Tuukka Rask comes back, that should be a solid tandem. So I think Boston's going to be okay. I don't think they're going to be super special. I don't know if they win a playoff round or anything, but definitely in the playoffs for sure. Buffalo is just a complete dumpster fire. I hate to, and I'm not trying to rag on Sabres fans. They've had it pretty rough for a few years now, but there's just not much there. Jeff Skinner, Middlestat, and Olofsson as a top line. I think they're in trouble with that. On defense, besides Rasmus Dahlin, they're looking very thin back there. Obviously, there's the whole Jack Eichel scenario. You hear conflicting rumors going back and forth. Oh, it is close, it's not close. It is close, it's not close. They apparently weren't willing to show other teams his medical records, which is a big red flag considering that he is trying to, or he wants to get surgery for a herniated disc or something on his neck. But Buffalo's going to have to figure that out. I don't think they're going to get as much value as they would like, but they have to try and milk out as much as they can, and not sharing his medical history just doesn't make sense. And then in net, super weak, Craig Anderson, Dustin Tokarski. Buffalo's going to be not a very good team. Bottom 2, bottom 3 in the league, hands down. Moving on to Detroit, this is a team that I would like to see get more competitive, and they're slowly getting there, but there's still a lot missing on this team. I like Dylan Larkin. Zadina looks kind of promising. Tyler Bertuzzi is a really good player to have. They got Pius Suter from Chicago. He was pretty good last year. Their forward group is okay, even though they're missing Jakub Vrana for a considerable amount of time. But on defense, they look pretty weak. Sure, they added Nick Leddy, but you still got Danny DeKeyser as a top pair guy. Moritz Seider, he's going to break into the NHL. We're going to see what he's all about. And then in net, Nedeljkovic, they got him for cheap from Carolina, and Thomas Greiss. I think that's going to be a pretty steady tandem, but losing Vrana, that's going to be a big hit to your top 6, and then just that defense I don't see being very good. So Detroit is probably going to be somewhere near the bottom of the league again. Montreal is a very interesting team. They obviously made the Stanley Cup Finals last year, but this is a team that I don't even think is a guarantee to make the playoffs this year. Losing Kotkaniemi wasn't huge. Like, they ended up managing to replace him with Dvorak, but losing Shea Weber, and they'll be without Carey Price for at least a while. So you got to think that's going to hurt their chances. They have a couple other players who are kind of day-to-day right now, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Cole Caulfield's going to make his full season debut, I guess you could say. A lot of people expecting a lot from him. That Montreal top line, I think, looks pretty solid. You know, forward depth is, I guess just depth in general is a big strength of this team. But they're kind of one of those teams where they don't have that top-end talent, or a lot of it, I should say. They don't have a lot of that top-end talent. And losing Weber on the back end, that's just going to hurt. They got David Savard, but you can't even compare the two. Montreal, I think they're going to be, if they can get Carey Price back in time, I think they can be at least pretty competitive, but I still don't really see this team making the playoffs. Florida had a bit of a breakout season last year, and it looks like they're going to be pretty much back with a lot of the same guys this year. They obviously brought in Sam Reinhart. He's going to fit pretty nicely into that top 6, I think. Their top 9 in general is, or just their entire forward group, I should say, is pretty deep. All 4 lines, they can roll them out. I don't see any of them really being a weak spot. Defense is pretty good. Aaron Ekblad had a pretty big season last year. They have a couple guys who are not the biggest names, not exactly household names, but are just solid on D. And in goalie, Bobrovsky, sure, he's overpaid, but in a tandem between him and Spencer Knight, I think that can actually work out pretty nicely. So Florida is one of those teams, I think they're in the playoffs for sure. And if things break their way, they can even be Stanley Cup contenders. Ottawa's another team that's really still in the rebuilding stage. Their best forward right now is still an RFA. Brady Tkachuk wants a short-term deal, like a bridge, while the team wants to sign him to long-term. So until one of those sides eventually breaks, which I have a feeling it's going to be the team that's going to have to give him less term, this is going to go on for a while. Could even go on as like a William Nylander situation in Toronto a couple years ago. But this team, they're starting to build up a nice program. Tim Stützle had a very nice rookie season. I expect him to come back and have an even better second season. He's got a lot of great tools and is certainly shaping up to be a star in the league. Other than that, though, there's a few guys. You got Connor Brown, Drake Batherson, Josh Norris, just some guys. But you go down lower throughout that lineup, it just gets weaker and weaker. And especially against some of the better teams, like Ottawa's going to get beat up on a lot of nights. Not physically, but just in terms of the scoreboard. On defense, they're not very strong. A little bit stronger than last year, but like Shabbat, Zaitsev, and then Mete and Holden as a bottom pair, that could be at least solid. If you go through, I guess, forward, defense, goaltending, I guess technically you could argue that defense might be Ottawa's strongest point, but again, none of them are really that strong. And then in net, Matt Murray and Anton Forsberg are coming back. Murray did not have a good season last year, and this is going to be a big chance to bounce back for him, and this might tell us where his career is heading this year if he has a good or bad season. But Ottawa definitely going to be one of the bottom teams in the league, bottom 10 for sure. Next up, the defending two-time Stanley Cup champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is a team, the rich just keep getting richer, right? Even though they lost a couple guys to have cap casualties in the expansion draft, this is still just the deepest lineup in the NHL, and it's not even really close. Every position, every line is just they have a guy that's better than the guys that you have, It's going to be incredibly tough for this team to win 3 in a row, but if any team is going to do it, it looks like it's going to be Tampa. Just so much depth. They brought in Corey Perry as well. Belmar's there as their fourth-line center. Zach Bogosian signed back as very cheap depth. They even upgraded at the backup goalie position, getting Brian Elliott. This is going to be a very tough team to beat, and they will be among the top teams in the league, top 5, top 3, however you want to put it, guaranteed. And they're obviously a Stanley Cup contender again. Lastly, in the Atlantic Division, we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, the team that always makes the playoffs but can never win a playoff round. I think Toronto's going to be at least good in the regular season. More or less the same team that they rolled out last year, minus Hyman, of course, and Freddie Anderson. A little bit of a change in net, getting Peter Mrazek instead. I think the big question with this team is just who are going to be the players that match up alongside the Matthews and the Tavares lines, who are going to be those left wingers. I think they have slightly better depth than they do last year down the lineup. Kerfoot, Kemp, and Kashe is, I think, a much better third line than what they were rolling out last year. Pretty much same defense, except Rasmus Sandin and Liljegren are in the picture instead of Bogosian. So it tells you they're going to be the kind of a puck-moving, more skilled team this year, which, of course, is the Leafs' strength. And I'm, of course, excited to see how Sandin and Liljegren develop. And in net, I expect Campbell to get most of the starts. So Toronto should be a playoff team and probably a top 10 team this season if they're able to get a good amount of health. So moving on to the Metropolitan Division, and first up is the Carolina Hurricanes. This is a team that has quickly established themselves as Stanley Cup contenders, although I fear that they might be taking a little bit of a step back this year. I think they're still very strong at forward, although it's a little concerning that they made a signing for a restricted free agent basically out of spite, bringing in Jesperi Kotkaniemi. They don't even have the room at center to play him. They're going to have to play him at left wing, which you got to think is not the greatest thing for his development. On top of that, you also lost your best defenseman from last year, Dougie Hamilton, and you brought in Tony DeAngelo as a replacement, which that's a big risk right there, even though D'Angelo's only in on a 1 year, $1 million deal. And in net, you basically lose all your guys from last year, and you bring in Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta, who are both injury prone and have not, and especially in Anderson's case, just has not been very good lately. So unless this team gets a lot of help from that defense and just having the puck more than the other team, goaltending could prove to be a big problem for this team. And I don't think Carolina's a guarantee for the playoffs right now. Next up, the Columbus Blue Jackets, a rebuilding team, of course. Although this could be a great opportunity for some of the young guys, especially Patrick Laine with the new coach, Jack Roslovic, Max Domi, Bjorkstrand. This is going to be a big chance for those guys to kind of show with the new system, new coach, that they can be guys that can be relied on. Getting Jakub Voracek basically from the cheap from Philadelphia, I think is one that could pay off big time. Voracek is a very, very talented offensive player. On defense, you of course lose Seth Jones, but you bring in Adam Boqvist, who's pretty promising. Jake Bean, another promising guy. You still got Werenski there. Obviously not huge names, but if things break their way, they could actually be a pretty decent team, especially considering Merzlikins and Korpisalo are a pretty dependable goaltending tandem. I don't think this is going to be a team that scores very often, but if they can keep the puck out of their net, I think they can be at least half decent and can surprise people on some nights. Next up, the New Jersey Devils. This is a team that, because they made some changes, I've looked at some models suggesting that if they could have close to 90 points this season, I got to pump the brakes on that one. I don't think they're going to be that good. Like, sure, they added Tatar and Dougie Hamilton, but it's still pretty thin down the lineup. I think they have a decent top six now. That bottom six, I don't know too much about. Pavel Zacha, I guess, is okay, and Miles Wood. Defense could be a little bit of an issue. They're paying $22 million to their right-handed D alone. That's one thing that can bite them in the butt this season, especially PK Subban, even though I doubt he's going to get much power play time. And then in net, they could be pretty solid. Mackenzie Blackwood, Jonathan Bernier, I think that's a pretty good tandem. New Jersey, I think they're going to be a lot better than they were last year, but I really can't see this team even making it close to the playoffs this year. Next up, the New York Islanders, and this is a team that ever since John Tavares left, they've just been so steady, so solid, and I expect that trend to continue this year. They don't have too much top-end talent on their team right now besides Matthew Barzal, but that's okay because they play a great, solid team game. They bring in Zach Parise, they bring in Zdeno Chara. I think those are great bets to bring in for this team. Both perfectly fit that system. We talked about Tampa having depth. Obviously, the Islanders don't have that top-end talent like Tampa did, but just line for line, just solid guys. And they're just going to wear guys out on most nights. And they have a solid goaltending tandem, too, that I think will come back nicely this season. Islanders are guaranteed for the playoffs, and they're Stanley Cup contender as well. They've been to the Final Four the last couple years. Next up, the New York Rangers, a team that is coming on the way up. I don't know if they're quite there yet. I think they're still maybe another center, another forward short of being true playoff contenders. Zibanejad is that top center. He has just been found money for them. They got him from the cheap from Ottawa a few years ago. Panarin's been amazing there. I think they're really going to have to ask for those guys, those young guys, Lafreniere and Kakko. They really need those guys to develop if they are going to compete for a playoff spot. I like how they brought in Ryan Reeves. That's going to make the Washington-New York rivalry just that much more fun. He's going to want a piece of Tom Wilson right away. Defense, they bring back Adam Fox, Norris Trophy winner. They're pretty solid on defense. I think that's a pretty good strength of this team. In net, they're kind of going with two young guys, Shesterkin and Georgiev. If those guys can hold down the fort pretty well, I think the Rangers could actually be okay. I just don't think they're ready for the playoffs just yet. Philadelphia, this is a team that I think got a lot better over the offseason. I love that they added Cam Atkinson. I love that they added Derek Brassard. I love that they added Ryan Ellis. That's probably the biggest one. Ristolainen, I think they gave up a little too much to get him, but I think that's still going to be a nice piece to have, especially on the power play units. Keith Yandel, another one that they brought in on the cheap too. And then in net, Carter Hart and Martin Jones. I think Jones is actually a great backup for this team to have. Because last year they went with Brian Elliott, and I think that forced them to lean on Hart a little bit too much. I think Jones is a guy that you can lean on a little bit more, so you can give Carter Hart the night off. I think that's going to benefit them big time. And this is a team that I think is in the playoffs. I think they can really surprise people this season and just be a really good team. Next up, the Pittsburgh Penguins. There's going to be no Crosby and Malkin right away, which obviously creates a big hole at the center position. Jeff Carter will be asked to step up as the number one center. Not ideal since this isn't 2011, but I think Pittsburgh has enough depth where if at least one of those guys comes back in time, they should at least be okay. Their defense isn't really banged up right now, which is good. You're going to need all those guys, especially if you have some big forwards out. The big red flag for this team is, of course, their goaltending. Tristan Jarry was just terrible for this team last year in the playoffs, and you're asking him to come back as the starter. You might be able to get through the regular season like that, but come playoff time, that's obviously going to be a big issue. And as of right now, Pittsburgh kind of looks like a bubble playoff team. I don't think it's a guarantee. And last up in the Metropolitan, we have the Washington Capitals. This is a team that looks as strong as they have the last few years. I'm worried about them that maybe they got a little too satisfied with that Stanley Cup win a few years ago. I don't know if they have that burning desire anymore, especially for Ovi, where he's so close to that Gretzky goal record. I think he's a little bit more focused on that right now than winning the Cup. But either way, we're just talking about the regular season right now. They're pretty stacked at every position. Might be a little bit of a worry in net that they're going with Samsonov and Vanacek, a couple young guys there, but I think they have enough on forward and defense where they'll have that puck a lot more often than they don't. So this is a guaranteed playoff team, probably a top 10 team in the league as well. Next up, we'll move into the Central Division, and we'll start with the Arizona Coyotes. This is another team where I think it's going to be a rough one for them. They got that insanely expensive now fourth line from Vancouver. They obviously got some futures for that, but this season just does not look very good for them. At forward, they're extremely weak. That first line, Keller, Schmaltz, Galchenyuk, obviously not ideal. On defense, like Chychrun, he's pretty good. He's very good, actually. They got Shane Gostisbehere, kind of a reclamation project. Anton Strawman's on his last legs. And those guys are all in the top four. And then in net, Carter Hutton and Joseph Coronar, I just don't see it. This is a team where they'll probably be in the bottom 5, bottom 3 as well. Next up, the Chicago Blackhawks. I think they're starting to get better this year. I still don't think they're quite ready to compete for the playoffs, especially since they're in such a competitive Central Division. They grabbed Tyler Johnson from Tampa. That's obviously a nice piece down the middle. So him, Taze, and Doc down the middle, that's actually pretty solid. Their forward group is actually okay, but I think the real problem with them is on defense. Seth Jones, obviously their big fish that they reeled in. His underlying numbers have been going downhill, and they just gave him a ton of money. It might work for a couple years, but down the line, you got to wonder when it's all going to fall apart. And besides him, there really isn't too much there. Like Jake McCabe, Connor Murphy, Calvin DeHaan, Riley Stillman, like it's not that great of a defense. They upgraded on goaltending. They got Fleury and Lankinen back there, but still, I have a feeling they're going to be allowing some grade A chances against. So I think Chicago's going to be a decent scoring team, but I'd be worried about what's going on behind, like how many pucks are going in on their own net, and I think that's going to cost them a playoff spot. Next up, we have Colorado, a team that always looks like, or has for the last couple of years, looks like that they're on the cusp of contending for a cup, but they just can't get over that hump. Obviously, super strong on offense. All four of those lines are pretty dangerous, and I think they match up pretty well against any team, basically. On defense, too, they're pretty solid. A little bit of a red flag that they brought in Jack Johnson to play third pair, so that might hurt them a little bit, but that top four, those other five, I should say, are great. Gerard, Makar, Byram, Eric Johnson, and Ryan Murray. And so you can hope that they can at least cover up some of Jack Johnson's mistakes. Even though I think he was brought in to be the 7th D, he's going to have to step up right away because they do have Devon Taves injured. And then in net, they lost Grubauer, but Kemper, Francouz is their tandem. I think that's pretty solid. So Colorado definitely in the playoffs, and one of the top teams as well. I'd be surprised if they weren't. Next up, the Dallas Stars, a team that just barely missed the playoffs last year as they were kind of getting it rolling just as the season was ending. But this is a pretty dangerous lineup. They obviously have a few older players who are kind of losing their way. Jamie Benn is not the same player he was a few years ago, but they have some young players in there too to kind of balance things out. And it's still a deep lineup. Like right now, I think Ben is expected to be on that third line where I think he should be at least pretty solid. Defense is this team's real strength, though. Esa Lindell, Miro Heiskanen, Suter, Klingberg. That's a fantastic top four, and it won't be fun to play against on most nights. Goaltending, a little bit of a concern. They're starting the season with Khudobin and Holtby, although if one or both of those guys really falters, Ottinger is just a short call-up away, essentially. And Ben Bishop, his career at this point is kind of in limbo, kind of in jeopardy. You just hope that he can get back. But either way, I think Dallas is going to be a pretty competitive team, and they'll be in the playoffs for sure. Next up, Minnesota. This was a team that looked like they might have had to rebuild, but they've gotten things turned around pretty quickly there, surprisingly. They bought up Parise and Suter, that buys them a ton of cap space. They got Kirill Kaprizov, basically the new superstar on the block in the NHL, one of the greatest point scorers in the league right now. Forward, they're pretty deep. They can play Kevin Fiala on that third line. They got Jordan Greenway in the second, Zuccarello, Kaprizov in that top line. Again, I think this is a team that at least their forward group matches up pretty well against pretty much anybody. Defense is a little bit weaker. You're moving from Suter to Goligoski, essentially. The other three guys in that top four, Spurgeon, Dumba, Brodian, are all back. But still a little bit of a concern. Suter might not have been worth that contract, but he's still a nice piece to have on your team. So it's going to be a little bit of a downgrade. Same tandem in net, though, so I think having that familiarity is going to be good for that team. I don't think the loss of Suter is going to hurt them too much. It might hurt them a little bit. Still think this is a playoff team, but I don't see this as a real true contending team right now. Next up is Nashville, another team that I don't think looks very good this year. Those contracts for Johansson and Duchesne have just not worked at all. Their forward group looks pretty thin. On defense, it's starting to get a little thin too. Yossi and Ekholm are back. They obviously didn't bring back Ryan Ellis. That's going to be a big loss. And then they lost Pekka Rinne, and they're using UC Saros as David Riddick as a tandem. I think that's going to be okay, but the rest of the team just doesn't give me any confidence. I don't think this is going to be a horrible team, but this is kind of a team kind of stuck in that purgatory of missing the playoffs by 10 points, but you're not quite in the basement where you get one of those top draft picks. Next up, we have St. Louis. I think this is a team that's going to be pretty competitive. They're decently deep at every position. Maybe they don't have as much top-end talent as they did a couple of years ago, losing Pietrangelo, but again, this is going to be a team that's going to be very tough to play against. The forward and D, I think, is okay. I think the goaltending is a little bit of a question mark. Binnington and Husso as a tandem. Binnington is obviously shown in flashes that he can be very good, but has really struggled a little bit since they won the Stanley Cup. And Husso, still kind of a prospect, so you don't really know what to expect from him. I expect St. Louis to still be in the playoffs, but I can't see them as one of the true contenders. And lastly, in the division, we have the Winnipeg Jets. This is a team that I actually think got really good. Dubois had a little bit of a rough start there. I think if he can really start to fit in on this team and play his natural position as center, he was kind of switched over to the wing last year, but if he can play that second line center role there with Ehlers and Kopp, that could be very dangerous. This is another team that can roll all four lines. Their defense actually got really strong. Morrissey, Nate Schmidt, Brendan Dillon, Neil Pionk, Nathan Beaulieu, Dylan DeMello, and Logan Stanley. I think those top 7 guys are very solid. Logan Stanley, I'm pretty excited about him. He's not the flashiest guy, but he's big, and I don't think he's very much fun to play against. And then in net, Connor Hellebuck, one of the best goalies in the league. His backup, Eric Comrie, there might be a little bit of a red flag if they got to lean into him and use him a little more than they would like. But overall, I think this is a playoff team, and Winnipeg could even win a playoff round. We'll see. I like that defense a lot. And lastly, we move on to the Pacific Division. We'll start off with the Anaheim Ducks, and this is a team that they're really in transition right now. They have the forward group. They're starting to load in some of the young talent in there, the Comtois and the Trevor Zegrases and those guys. But there's still a lot of veterans there. Getzlaf, Henrique, Silverberg. I can't see things working right away. I think they're asking for a lot of those young guys. Like, I think Zegras is the real deal, but how much are those other guys going to give you? On defense, they could actually be solid. Lindholm, Manson, Fowler. If Jamie Drysdale's ready to play in that top four, that could be huge. And they have Kevin Shattenkirk as kind of a power play specialist. In net, John Gibson, very good goalie. I don't think this team will be very good, but if those young guys do end up taking that next step, they can be dangerous and they will surprise some teams. Next up, the Calgary Flames, probably one of the most disappointing teams, just considering all the hype this team had a few years ago, but they can never really get to that next level. They can't even make the playoffs really consistently. Brought in Blake Coleman as a big free agent signing. I think they're overpaying him, and it looks like he'll be playing on that top line, so I'm curious to see how that shakes out. I know Gaudreau and Monahan have taken their licks in that city. Monahan especially, I've been pretty disappointed in him. He's got all the tools to be a consistent 30-goal-a-year guy. Just hasn't happened for whatever reason. Their defense took a step back. Losing their captain Giordano to Seattle definitely hurts. Bring in Zadorov. I don't quite think that fills in the gap. This is a team with a lot of holes right now, and I think I can't see them having a good season. Jakob Markstrom did not have a great first season there, and I kind of don't see it happening again. I think Calgary's kind of stuck right now. I think they're paying too much to really tank right now, so they're going to just have to see how the season goes out, and I think they're going to be another team kind of stuck in that kind of purgatory category. Next up, the Edmonton Oilers. Edmonton, I think they're going to be pretty good. Those top two lines, I think, are going to win them a lot of games. Like on most nights, I think it's going to help them out. They gave up a little too much to get Duncan Keith, but I think nonetheless he's going to be pretty helpful for that team. Just, if nothing else, he can play some of that penalty kill, second pair, and just be a good veteran presence. If Evan Bouchard is able to step up, that could be big. I don't like that they brought in Cody Ceci, but there's not enough red flags on this team for this team to miss the playoffs, especially considering McDavid and Draisaitl are just going to be so dangerous on most nights. Goaltending, I think Smith is going to be okay for them, and I think they'll get into the playoffs, but once there, I don't think they're true contenders. Next up, Los Angeles. This is a team that I think is getting ready to compete for a playoff spot this year. They have turned things around pretty quick. I love that they added Victor Arvidsson and Philip Deneau. Those were some big holes that they needed to fill. They have a few of the young guys ready to step up. Quentin Byfield, if it wasn't for his injury, he'd be on this team right now. Might hurt them a little bit, but they have some other young guys that I think can fill in quite nicely. And their defense got back to being pretty good pretty quick. And Drew Doughty is right there to lead the way again. And I think he's going to step up. I think he's going to show us a little glimpse of what we remember Drew Doughty being. I don't think he's going to be quite as good as what we remember when he was, winning the Norris Trophy and winning the Stanley Cup. But I think he's going to have a nice little renaissance season. And then in net, Cal Peterson and Jonathan Quick, that's as solid tandem as you ever seen, especially considering LA's a defensive team. I don't think it's going to hurt that team at all. So I think LA's in the playoffs, and they're kind of in that same position as Edmonton, where I think they'll get in, but I don't think they're going to be true contenders. But for LA, you just got to worry about building up this program, and I think you're kind of focused on the years coming up as opposed to this one, even though you still really want to get in this year. Next up is San Jose, and oh boy, this is shaping up to be one of the worst teams in the NHL. Just very thin. Just look at their forwards right now, very thin down there. They're going to be without Evander Kane for a little bit. Definitely doesn't help. A lot of old guys on this team, like Logan Couture is not the young whippersnapper he once was. And then Thomas Hertl and Timo Meier, again, the same. They're not as old as Couture. They're kind of in the they are what they are category. They're not going to develop any further. And then on defense, that's just a complete mess. Brent Burns, Erik Karlsson, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, just all so overpaid, and there's just really nothing you can do with each of those guys right now. In net, they're going with Aiden Hill and James Reimer as a tandem. That's a big red flag. The good thing about San Jose is that they do have their own first-round pick this year, and they're going to be a bottom 5 team for sure. I just do not see this team being competitive at all. Next up, we have the newest NHL team, the 32nd franchise, the Seattle Kraken. This is a team where I think they're just going to kind of be okay. They built a little bit more for the future than Vegas did initially. They have, all things considering, it's a pretty deep lineup. But the problem is there doesn't look to be that top-end talent right now. They got Yanni Gourde, who looked like he was going to be that number one center, but he's got surgery. Looks like he won't be back for a bit. Jared McCann is actually going to be that number one center, which is pretty interesting. I don't think he's ever really played that role before, at least not in the NHL. They got James Schwartz and Jordan Eberle. I think those are some nice guys to have on that top line. They definitely have some guys that can score and can kind of play in a system. I'm wondering if it could be like Vegas, where they surprise people just because these guys have been in opportunities where they've never been in before, but I don't know. I don't really see that Lightning striking twice. On defense, I think they're actually really solid. Giordano, Larson, Oleksiak, Dunn. That's a pretty solid top four. I think they're going to be pretty good defensively, especially Drieger and Grubauer is their tandem. I think scoring is going to be the big problem for this team. Just that second line, Johansson, Venberg, Yarncrow, that's weak for a second line. I was wrong about Vegas a few years ago, so I could be wrong about this team, but I don't see this team as horrible, but I also just don't see this team making the playoffs. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks, and this is a team that I think got a lot better over the offseason. They paid a pretty penny to do it, to get rid of those problem contracts and bring in a nice forward like Connor Garland, a nice D like Oliver Ekman-Larsson. But Pettersson's back. You expect him to have another big season. Their top nine is pretty solid. I like their forward group. Defense not as strong. I've seen concerns about Oliver Ekman-Larsson's numbers going down. Still relying on Tyler Myers as a top four. Quinn Hughes leaves a little bit to be desired off defensively. So you got to wonder how things shake out. But they do have a solid goaltending tandem in Thatcher Demko and Yaro Halak, so that could bail them out on a lot of nights. Plus, I think this team's going to score a lot too. I think Vancouver is in the playoffs, but again, I just don't see them as a real contender. And last but not least, we have the Vegas Golden Knights, and this is the one true contender I think we have in the Pacific Division. They should be a lock for that Final Four. A lot of the same guys they brought in as last year, plus they bring in Nolan Patrick and Dadanoff to kind of shore up that third line. You gotta love that forward group, just so deep, have so much talent. On defense too, they're looking great. Martinez, Pietrangelo, Shea Theodore, Braden McNabb. That's solid as of top four as any. And then in net, Robin Leonard, Laurent Brossoit, pretty solid too. Brossoit maybe a little bit of a concern as him coming as the backup. Like, you have to wonder how, because Leonard's done well in tandems mostly, but if they rely on him too much here, you got to wonder what that's going to do for his numbers. Still, I don't think that's a huge concern, at least not right now. Still expect this team to win their division pretty easily and, you know, of course, win a couple playoff rounds after. But that will do it for my NHL season preview, what I get right, what I get wrong. Let me know, and you'll hear from me soon. Take care. You can follow me online on Twitter and on Instagram at AndrewMilani6.